I watched my husband sign away my childhood home, the brownstone my grandmother left me, with the same smug smile he'd worn when he'd first convinced me to put it in his name for tax purposes. The same smile he'd given me last week when he laughed at my business pitch over dinner with his colleagues. The same smile that was still on his face when the truck hit us both 3 hours later. The same smile I vowed would never touch his face again. I woke up gasping, my 22-year-old body drenched in sweat, back in my cramped college dorm room. The physics textbook lay open on my chest, the same one I'd been studying the night before I met Marcus Chen at that startup networking event. The calendar on my phone read March 15th, 2015, 10 years before my death. 10 years before I'd lost everything. 10 years to make him pay. My hands shook as I touched my face, my unlined face, free of the exhaustion that had marked my 32-year-old features, free of the sadness that had settled into my bones after years of Marcus systematically destroying everything I loved. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. "Don't forget Sunday dinner, sweetheart. I want to hear all about your classes." I started crying then, great heaving sobs that made my roommate stir in her sleep. Grandma rose. She'd died 2 years from now in 2017, and I'd been too wrapped up in Marcus's whirlwind courtship to spend her final months with her. Too dazzled by his Harvard MBA and his tech startup that was about to explode to notice her growing frailer. He'd discouraged me from visiting her. "You need to focus on us," he'd said. "On our future." Our future. What a sick joke that had been. I'd met Marcus at a startup pitch competition when I was 23. He'd been 28, already running his second company, dripping with charisma and confidence. I'd been presenting my business idea, a platform that used AI to match freelance creative professionals with clients with a unique algorithm I'd developed that assessed both skill compatibility and working style preferences. It was good. It was innovative. Marcus had approached me after, bought me coffee, listened to my pitch with intense focus. "This is brilliant," he'd said. "But you're thinking too small. Let me help you scale this." Within months, we were dating. Within a year, engaged. Within 2 years, married, and my business idea had somehow become his business idea, with my name nowhere on the incorporation papers. "You're better at the technical side," he'd told me. "Let me handle the business end. You trust me, right?" I'd trusted him. God, I'd been such a fool. By year 3 of our marriage, Creative Match, the name I'd chosen, the platform I'd designed, was valued at $50 million. Marcus was the sole founder on paper. I was his technical advisor, paid a salary while he raked in equity. When I'd confronted him, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Who's going to believe you came up with this? I have the patents, the incorporation papers, everything in my name. You helped, sure, but the vision, the execution, that was all me, sweetheart." The gaslighting had been masterful. He'd convinced me I was remembering wrong, that I was being ungrateful, that without him I'd still be nobody. And the worst part? I'd eventually believed him. My confidence had eroded so completely that when Grandma Rose died and left me the brownstone, worth $3 million in Brooklyn's red-hot real estate market, I'd let him convince me to put it in his name. "We're married," he'd said. "What's the difference? Besides, if it's in my name, we can use it as collateral for the Series B funding. This is for us, for our future." There was no Series B funding. He just wanted to own everything that was mine. The final betrayal had come last month. Last month in my previous life, I reminded myself. I'd spent 18 months secretly developing a new algorithm, a revolutionary approach to predictive modeling for creative collaboration. I'd been so careful, using my own laptop, my own time. I'd pitched it to Marcus over dinner with some of his investor friends, hoping he'd finally see me as a partner. He'd laughed. They'd all laughed. "Honey, this is adorable," Marcus had said, his voice dripping with condescension as his colleagues chuckled. "But leave the big ideas to people who understand business. Why don't you stick to what you're good at? Maybe bake some more of those cookies everyone loved at the last company party?" I'd left that dinner in tears. Driven home alone, and seen the paperwork on his desk, the paperwork to sell my grandmother's brownstone to a developer for $5 million, the same developer who wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos. I'd confronted him. We'd fought. I'd told him I wanted a divorce, that I wanted my grandmother's house back, that I was done. He'd laughed again, that same goddamn laugh, and told me, good luck proving the house was ever really mine. You signed it over to me, remember? You have nothing. You are nothing without me. We'd both stormed out, both driven off angry, and the truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel had hit both our cars at the intersection of Atlantic and Court Street. I'd died knowing he'd won, knowing he'd stolen everything from me, and I'd let him. Not this time. I looked at my phone again. March 2015. The startup pitch competition where I'd met Marcus was in 2 weeks, which meant I had 2 weeks to prepare, to plan, to make absolutely certain that this time, everything would be different. First, I needed to secure my assets. I called my grandmother. Sweetheart! Her voice, so alive, so full of warmth, made me start crying again. What's wrong? Nothing, Grandma. Everything's perfect. I love you. So much. I love you too, dear. Are you sure you're all right? I'm wonderful. Grandma, can I come over today instead of Sunday? I want to talk to you about something important. 3 hours later, I was sitting in her kitchen in the brownstone, drinking her legendary chamomile tea and trying to figure out how to explain what I needed without sounding insane. Grandma, I want to talk to you about your estate planning. She raised an eyebrow. I'm 68, dear, not dead yet. I know, but I've been thinking about the future. About this house. It's worth a fortune now, and it's only going to increase in value. And I want to make sure it stays in the family. That it's protected. Something in my voice must have resonated with her because her expression turned serious. What brought this on? I couldn't tell her about Marcus, about the future I was desperate to prevent. So I told her a different truth. I've been learning about asset protection in one of my business classes, and I realized how vulnerable family assets can be, especially in marriages. I want this house to always be yours and mine, no matter what happens in my life, no matter who I marry or what choices I make. Grandma Rose studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. You're smarter than I was at your age. Come on, let's call my lawyer. By the end of the week, Grandma's estate had been restructured. The brownstone was placed in an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary, structured so that it could never be claimed by a spouse in divorce, never used as collateral without my explicit consent to the trustee, and never sold without unanimous approval from a board of trustees that included Grandma's lawyer, her financial advisor, and her oldest friend from college, 3 people who loved her and would never let anyone pressure me into anything. It feels like overkill, Grandma said as we left the lawyer's office. But something tells me you know what you're doing. I hugged her tight. Thank you, and Grandma, I'm going to visit every week, I promise. I'm holding you to that. Next, I needed to protect my intellectual property. I spent the following week documenting everything, every line of code for my algorithm, every iteration of my business plan, every sketch and wireframe and data model. I filed for provisional patents on 3 separate innovations. I created a timestamp trail a mile long, and I opened a business bank account and incorporated my company, Creative Match, LLC, with me as the sole founder and CEO. Then I prepared for Marcus. I knew exactly how he operated because I'd fallen for it the first time. He'd approach me after my pitch, compliment my idea, offer to help. He'd be charming, attentive, brilliant. He'd make me feel special, seen, valued, all while positioning himself to take everything. This time, I'd let him think it was working, but I'd be the one in control. The pitch competition arrived. I'd rewritten my presentation to be even stronger than the original, incorporating everything I'd learned over 10 years of watching Marcus build my company. When I stepped on stage, I was nervous, but it was the electric nervousness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I killed it. The judges loved it. And when I stepped off stage, there was Marcus, right on schedule, with 2 coffees and that devastating smile. That was incredible, he said, offering me a cup. I'm Marcus Chen. I run a startup in the creative tech space, and your platform could be revolutionary. Can I buy you lunch? I'd love to hear more. I took the coffee, smiled back. Sure, I'd love that. Over lunch, I let him do his thing, let him ask probing questions about my algorithm, my business model, my monetization strategy. Let him be impressed, intrigued, interested. And when he asked if I'd ever thought about taking on a business partner, someone with experience and connections who could help me scale, I pretended to consider it carefully. Maybe, I said, but I'd need to get to know you better first. I don't just hand over my work to anyone. His eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe, or the thrill of a challenge. In my previous life, I'd been so grateful for his attention that I'd been easy prey. This version of me was going to make him work for it. We started dating. He was exactly as I remembered. Charming, intelligent, attentive when it served him. He took me to the best restaurants, introduced me to impressive people, made me feel like I was special, like we were partners. But this time, I saw through it. I saw the way he steered conversations to extract information about my work, the way he casually suggested I send him my code to take a look and offer feedback, the way he tried to isolate me from my friends and family, always with plausible excuses. Your grandmother sounds lovely, he said after I'd mentioned visiting her for the third week in a row. But you should be networking on weekends, building your business. You can visit her anytime. My grandmother is dying, I lied smoothly. She has maybe a year left. I'm seeing her every chance I get. The look on his face, a flash of irritation before he smoothed it into sympathy, told me everything I needed to know. He'd been planning to pull the same move, to separate me from her before she could leave me the brownstone. Not this time, you bastard. 6 months into our relationship, Marcus proposed. I said yes, because I needed him to think he was winning. But I insisted on a prenuptial agreement. It's not that I don't trust you, I said sweetly. But my lawyer insisted. The trust on my grandmother's property requires it, and honestly, I think it's smart. We're both business people. We understand protecting assets. He didn't like it, but he couldn't refuse without showing his hand. The prenup my lawyer drafted was ironclad. All intellectual property developed by either party remained solely with that party. All assets owned before marriage remained separate. In the event of divorce, neither party could claim anything that wasn't jointly purchased during the marriage. Marcus signed it because he thought he was smarter than me. He thought he'd find a way around it. We married in a small ceremony. Grandma Rose was there, healthy and vibrant, and she whispered in my ear during our dance, "You know what you're doing, don't you?" "Yes," I whispered back. "Trust me." After the wedding, Marcus ramped up his campaign to take control of Creative Match. He suggested we merge our companies, combine resources. I refused. He offered to introduce me to investors, but only if he could be in the meetings as our family's business representative. I declined and found my own investors and made sure every contract, every incorporation paper, every patent had my name alone. He started getting frustrated. I could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the edge in his voice when I'd refuse his help. The perfect mask was starting to crack. "Why are you being so stubborn about this?" he demanded one night after I'd told him I was moving forward with Series A funding on my own. "We're married. We're supposed to be a team." "We are a team," I said calmly. "But Creative Match is my company, just like Chen Digital is your company. We can support each other without being joined at the hip professionally." "This isn't what I signed up for," he snapped. "What did you sign up for, Marcus?" He caught himself, forced a smile. "Nothing. I just want to help you succeed. I love you." "I love you too," I lied. The truth was I felt nothing for him. How could I? I knew exactly what he was, what he wanted, what he'd done, what he would have done to me. Every smile, every touch, every "I love you" was just me playing my part until the time was right. That time came 18 months into our marriage. Creative Match had just closed a Series B funding round for $75 million. I was the sole founder with 80% equity. The company was valued at $200 million, and Marcus was seething. I'd been careful. I'd documented every attempt he'd made to steal my work, every conversation where he'd tried to claim credit for my ideas, every email where he'd posed as a co-founder to my investors, which I'd immediately corrected, copied to my lawyer. I had 18 months of evidence that my husband had been systematically attempting to commit fraud and steal my intellectual property. Then I gave him the opening he'd been waiting for. "I've been working on something new," I told him over dinner one night. "A revolutionary predictive algorithm for creative collaboration. It could be worth more than Creative Match itself." His eyes lit up. "Tell me more." I described the algorithm, the same one I'd pitched in my previous life, the one he'd laughed at, but this time, I made it sound even better, more promising, more valuable, and I told him I was going to pitch it to investors in 2 weeks. "Can I see the code?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Of course. We're partners, right?" I pulled out my laptop and showed him the files, let him think he had access. What I didn't tell him was that the laptop was a honeypot. Every keystroke was logged, every file access was tracked, and the algorithm itself was watermarked with my digital signature in a dozen invisible ways. Over the next week, Marcus did exactly what I knew he would. He copied my code, he filed a provisional patent under his name. He scheduled meetings with investors, claiming he'd developed a revolutionary new algorithm. I let him. I watched him do it through the keylogger my tech team had installed. I collected every piece of evidence. And then, on the day before his first big investor pitch, I made my move. I called the police and reported intellectual property theft. I provided them with the keylogger evidence, the timestamps showing when he'd accessed my files, the comparison between my original code and his stolen version. I provided testimony from my entire development team about the project they'd watched me build over 6 months. I showed them the patent filing I'd made 3 weeks before he'd copied the code, the real filing, not the one I'd told him I was planning to make. Then I filed for divorce and submitted every piece of evidence of his 18-month campaign to defraud me to the judge. The fallout was spectacular. Marcus was arrested at his office in front of his entire team. The fraud charges were serious. He was looking at 5 to 7 years if convicted. His investors pulled out immediately. Chen Digital lost its funding, and without Marcus at the helm, and with the fraud investigation, it collapsed within weeks. The divorce was swift. The prenup held. He got nothing from me, and I claimed the apartment we'd bought together because I'd paid for 80% of it and had the bank records to prove it. His assets were frozen pending the criminal trial. But I wasn't done. I reached out to every person Marcus had ever wronged in his career, and there were many. In my previous life, I'd been too caught up in him to notice, but now I saw the pattern clearly. There had been other partners he'd squeezed out, other people whose ideas he'd stolen, other women he'd charmed and manipulated. I found them all, and I helped them build their cases. 3 other fraud charges materialized. A pattern of behavior emerged. What could have been a plea deal became a slam-dunk conviction. Marcus Chen was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, intellectual property theft, and a laundry list of other charges. His lawyer argued for leniency. The judge laughed at him. That laugh. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, but I still wasn't done. Remember that brownstone? The one Marcus had sold for $5 million in my previous life? I'd turned it into the headquarters for Creative Match. My grandmother moved into the top floor, and I converted the rest into the most beautiful creative workspace in AES. Brooklyn. High ceilings, exposed brick, natural light pouring through enormous windows. A place where artists and designers and writers could collaborate, could build, could thrive. I named the main conference room after Grandma Rose. Creative Match went public 3 years later. The IPO valued the company at $1.2 billion. My 80% stake made me worth just under $1 billion overnight. I was 28 years old, the same age Marcus had been when we met in my previous life. The tech press called me a prodigy, a visionary, the next great female founder. They wrote profiles about my overnight success, not knowing it had taken me 2 lifetimes to build. I did interviews on stages across the world, talking about creativity and collaboration and the importance of protecting your intellectual property. I never mentioned Marcus Chen by name. I didn't have to. Everyone in the industry knew who the ex-husband was, the one who'd tried to steal my work and ended up in federal prison. He'd become a cautionary tale, a punchline, a footnote in my success story. But the real victory came on a Saturday afternoon, 5 years after his conviction. I was having tea with Grandma Rose on the brownstone's roof deck. I'd had it converted into a garden oasis with views of Manhattan. We were celebrating her 75th birthday and my company's 5th anniversary. She was healthy, vibrant, full of life, and so proud of me it made my heart ache. "You know what I never told you?" she said, sipping her chamomile. "That day you came to me about estate planning when you were just 22. You had this look in your eyes, like you'd seen things, lived through things no young woman should have to live through." I froze. "Grandma, I don't know what happened to you, or how, or why, but I knew you were protecting yourself from something. Someone." She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you won, sweetheart. Whatever the battle was, I'm glad you won." Tears streamed down my face. "Me too, Grandma. Me too." My phone buzzed. An email from my lawyer. Marcus was up for parole and had been denied. The parole board had cited his complete lack of remorse and his continued claims that he was the real victim in his case. He'd be in prison for at least another 4 years. I deleted the email and put my phone away. Marcus Chen was my past, both of them. He couldn't hurt me anymore. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I'd rebuilt my life brick by brick, decision by decision. I'd protected what was mine, built what was mine, and created something beautiful and lasting. Creative Match wasn't just successful, it was changing the industry, helping thousands of creative professionals find meaningful work and build sustainable careers. I'd done it without him, in spite of him, to spite him, if I was honest, and it felt glorious. The next year, I established the Rose Chen Foundation for young women entrepreneurs, providing grants, legal support, and business education to women starting companies in male-dominated fields. The name made Grandma cry happy tears. The mission statement included a line about protecting your vision and your rights from the very beginning. I funded it with $100 million. The foundation's first grant went to a young woman with a brilliant idea and an older boyfriend who seemed too interested in her business plan. Her name was Sarah, and she reminded me achingly of my younger self, bright-eyed, trusting, brilliant, vulnerable. "I'm going to tell you something," I said to her during our first meeting, "and I need you to listen. Not all of you're going to understand why, but I need you to trust me." I told her about intellectual property protection, about prenuptial agreements and irrevocable trusts, about documenting everything and trusting herself more than she trusted anyone else's belief in her. I told her my story, or a version of it, leaving out the part about dying and being reborn. "Your boyfriend laughed at my pitch once," I said. It wasn't quite true, but it was true enough. He told me to stick to baking cookies. And you know what? That laugh motivated me more than any encouragement ever could, because it showed me exactly who he was. Sarah broke up with her boyfriend 2 weeks later. She went on to build a multi-million-dollar company. She wasn't my only success story. The foundation helped hundreds of women in its first year alone. Marcus, I heard through the grapevine, had tried to write a memoir from prison. The truth about Creative Match, how I built a tech empire and was destroyed by my ex-wife's lies. Not a single publisher would touch it. His lawyer had advised him that publishing it would open him up to defamation lawsuits that would bankrupt him for life. He'd ended up self-publishing it on Amazon. It sold 73 copies, mostly to people writing sarcastic reviews. 7 years after his conviction, Marcus was finally released on parole. I heard he'd moved to Ohio, was working as a mid-level manager at a regional marketing firm. The non-compete clause in his parole agreement prevented him from working in tech for another 5 years. The fraud conviction meant no venture capital firm would ever fund him again. He was 43 years old and utterly irrelevant. I was 33, worth $2.4 billion, and had just been named to Time's 100 Most Influential People list. Grandma Rose, at 80, was still healthy and sharp, and she came with me to the Time Gala. We walked the red carpet together, her in vintage Dior, me in a custom gown I'd commissioned from a designer whose career Creative Match had launched. A reporter called out, "Evan, do you have any comment on Marcus Chen's release from prison?" I paused, considered. I hadn't said his name publicly in 7 years, but this seemed like the right moment to address it one final time. I'm glad he's out, I said clearly. I believe in rehabilitation and second chances. I hope he's learned from his mistakes and will do better in the future. As for me, I'm focused on the future I'm building, one based on honesty, hard work, and empowering others to succeed. That's all I have to say about that. It was gracious. It was diplomatic. It was perfect. It also made it crystal clear who had won. The reporter tried to follow up, but I was already moving down the carpet with Grandma on my arm, both of us smiling for the cameras. That night, at the gala, I was seated between a Supreme Court justice and the CEO of the world's largest philanthropic foundation. We talked about justice, about fairness, about building systems that protected the vulnerable. I told them about the foundation, about Sarah, and the hundreds of women like her. You're doing important work, the justice told me, creating lasting change. I'm trying, I said. I'm just trying to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. What did happen to you? She asked gently. I smiled. I got a second chance. And I didn't waste it. Later that night, back in the brownstone, I stood in the conference room named after my grandmother and looked at the photos on the wall. Grandma rose at the ribbon cutting. Our first team of 10 employees, the IPO bell ringing, Sarah and the other grant recipients, the expansion to 15 cities, the international offices in London, Singapore, Berlin, a decade of my life, this life, the one I'd built, summed up in frames on a brick wall. There was one more photo I needed to add. I pulled it from my bag. Grandma and me at the Time Gala, both of us laughing, genuinely happy, alive in a moment I'd have missed in my first life because I'd have been too busy propping up Marcus's ego and my grandmother would have already been dead. I hung it in the center of the wall. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Evan Chen? A man's voice, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Marcus. Chen. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, and I'll understand if you hang up. But I needed to call. I needed to say. I waited, my heart suddenly pounding. After all these years, after everything, he still had the power to make me angry. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did or tried to do, but I've had 7 years to think about it, and I was so jealous of you, of your talent. Your ideas were always better than mine, and I couldn't stand it. I thought if I could just take what you had, I'd be successful too. But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I said nothing. I saw your Time interview, he continued. Saw what you've built, the foundation, the company, all of it. You did it without me. You did it in spite of me. And it's incredible. You're incredible. You always were. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy trying to tear you down to make myself feel bigger. Still, I said nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I know the truth now. You won. You deserve to win, and I'm glad you did. Goodbye, Evan. He hung up. I stood there holding my phone, emotions swirling through me. Anger, vindication, pity, relief. But mostly, I felt nothing. His apology, his admission, his acceptance of defeat, none of it mattered, because I hadn't built this life to spite him or to prove him wrong. I'd built it because it was mine. Because I deserved it, because I was good enough, smart enough, strong enough to create something beautiful and lasting. Marcus Chen had been a villain in my story, yes, but he wasn't the point of the story. I was. I deleted his number from my call log and went upstairs to my apartment. Grandma was already asleep in her room, exhausted from the gala but happy. I could hear her gentle snoring through the door. I changed into pajamas, made myself tea, and sat on my couch looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. Somewhere out in that city were hundreds of women who'd been helped by the foundation. Thousands of creative professionals who'd found work through Creative Match. My team of 1,500 employees, my partners, my friends, The life I'd built from the ground up, twice. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just closed our Series A, 15 million. Thank you for everything. You saved my life. I smiled and texted back. You saved your own life. I just showed you the tools. Another text came through, this one from my COO. Preliminary Q4 numbers are in. We're up 40% year over year. You're going to need to make another billion-dollar decision soon. Such terrible problems to have. I laughed out loud. Terrible problems indeed. 10 years ago, or was it 20? I died in a car crash, believing I was nothing without Marcus Chen, believing he'd won, believing I'd lost everything. Now I was everything I'd ever wanted to be and more. I'd saved my grandmother, built my company, protected my assets, helped hundreds of others, and along the way, I'd destroyed the man who'd destroyed me. Not with poison or violence or direct revenge, though part of me had fantasized about it. No, I'd destroyed him with something far more powerful, success. My success. My undeniable, unquestionable, completely on my own merit success. He'd laughed at my business idea. He'd tried to steal everything from me. And now he was a paroled felon working a dead-end job while I owned the brownstone he'd tried to steal, ran the company he'd tried to take, and lived the life he'd tried to destroy. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't revenge at all. It was living so well, so loudly, so brilliantly, that his failure to destroy me became his defining characteristic. Marcus Chen would be remembered, if he was remembered at all, as the man who tried to steal from Evan Chen and failed, as the man who laughed at a business idea worth billions, as the man who became his brilliant wife's tenant when she turned her inherited brownstone into her company headquarters. No, wait, that wasn't quite right. He'd never been my tenant. He just tried to become my landlord and ended up with nothing. I'd become his landlord, though, in a metaphorical sense. His entire life now existed in the shadow of mine. Every news article about Creative Match was a reminder that he'd tried to steal it and failed. Every grant from the foundation was proof that I'd succeeded without him. Every building I owned, every company I invested in, every woman I helped, it all stood as a monument to his failure. He'd tried to own me, my work, my life. Instead, I owned the narrative. I owned the industry. I owned my future. I owned everything he'd tried to take. Grandma Rose appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Can't sleep? Just thinking, I said. She came and sat beside me, taking my hand. About him? A little. He called tonight, apologized. Did he mean it? Maybe. Probably. I don't think it matters. No, she agreed. I don't think it does either. You won a long time ago, sweetheart, when you chose to protect yourself. When you chose to believe in yourself. The rest was just details. I leaned my head on her shoulder. Thank you, Grandma, for trusting me, for protecting the house, for everything. Thank you for giving me these years, she said softly. I don't know how or why, but I know you saved me somehow. Saved us both. We sat there together, grandmother and granddaughter, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. I thought about the life I'd lived before, the one where I'd lost everything, the life where Marcus had won. That life was gone now, erased by my second chance. This was my life now, the real one, the one I'd fought for, the one I'd built with my own hands and my own mind, and it was perfect. The next morning, I woke to find an email from a reporter at Forbes. They wanted to do a cover story, how Evan Chen built a billion-dollar empire and changed an industry. I approved the interview request and copied my PR team. Later that day, I had a board meeting where we discussed acquiring a smaller competitor, a company that Marcus had once tried to invest in but been rejected from because of his criminal record. The acquisition would give us entry into the European market and add $200 million to our valuation. The board approved it unanimously. That afternoon, I met with my estate lawyer to update my will. Creative Match would go to my employees through a trust. The brownstone would be preserved as a foundation headquarters. My personal wealth would fund grants and scholarships in perpetuity. You're very young to be planning this so thoroughly, the lawyer noted. I've learned not to leave anything to chance, I said. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah and 5 other Omae-san Foundation grant recipients. They were brilliant, fierce, successful women who'd all faced men who'd tried to steal from them, diminish them, control them. They'd all won. We toasted to second chances, even though I was the only one who'd had one, literally. We toasted to sisterhood and solidarity. We toasted to our success. And silently, privately, I toasted to Marcus Chen, not with gratitude, but with acknowledgement. His cruelty had forged me into something stronger. His theft had taught me to protect what was mine. His laughter had fueled my determination to succeed beyond his wildest nightmares. He'd tried to destroy me and instead had created his own destroyer. 3 months later, Forbes hit the stands with my face on the cover. The article was titled, "The Chen Dynasty: How One Woman Built an Empire on Creativity, Courage, and Revenge." The writer had done her research. She'd found Marcus, interviewed him in his sad Ohio apartment. He'd refused to speak on the record, but his lawyer had confirmed the basic facts of the fraud case. The article presented him as a cautionary tale, a villain in my hero's journey. The article went viral. Creative Match's stock jumped 15%. My personal brand became even more powerful. Job applications to the foundation tripled. And Marcus? I heard he'd changed his phone number and deleted his social media accounts. He'd become invisible, which was somehow more satisfying than if he'd tried to fight back. He was nothing. A footnote. A warning to others. I was everything. 5 more years passed. I turned 38. Grandma Rose turned 85 and was still healthy, still vibrant, still the center of my world. Creative Match was now worth $15 billion and operated in 72 countries. The foundation had helped over 10,000 women entrepreneurs. I'd been invited to speak at the UN, at Davos, at commencement ceremonies for colleges around the world. I bought a second brownstone next to the first one, renovated it, and turned it into affordable housing for artists. I named it Rose House. I started dating again, carefully, with good boundaries, and ironclad prenups always at the ready. Nothing serious, nothing that threatened what I'd built. I'd learned my lesson about mixing love and business, about trusting too easily. Or rather, I'd learned it in a life I barely remembered anymore. This life, the good one, the real one, this life I'd built on solid ground. And then one Tuesday afternoon, while I was in a meeting reviewing Q3 earnings, my assistant knocked on the door with an urgent message. Marcus Chen had died. Heart attack at 49. Sudden. He'd been found in his apartment by a neighbor. I excused myself from the meeting and went to my office, closed the door, sat at my desk, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no closure, just nothing. He'd become so irrelevant to my life that even his death barely registered. I thought about going to the funeral, but what would be the point? To gloat? To prove I'd survived and thrived? I didn't need to prove anything. Everyone already knew. Instead, I made a donation to a heart health charity in his name. Not a large one, enough to be noticed, but not enough to be significant. $5,000, a rounding error in my personal wealth. It felt appropriately symbolic. That night, I told Grandma about Marcus's death. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't," I admitted. "I thought I would feel something. Victory, maybe, or pity, but there's just nothing." "That's because you stopped fighting him years ago," she said wisely. "You moved on, built your life. He was already dead to you in all the ways that mattered." She was right. Marcus Chen had died to me the moment I'd woken up in my 22-year-old body with 10 years of memories and a determination to rewrite my story. Everything that came after, the planning, the protection, the building, the success, none of it had really been about him. It had all been about me, about saving myself, about becoming the person I was always meant to be. Marcus had just been an obstacle I'd navigated around. I went to bed that night and slept peacefully, dreamlessly. When I woke up the next morning, I went for a run through Brooklyn, came home to have breakfast with Grandma, and went to work where my team was waiting to discuss our expansion into South America. Life went on. My life. The beautiful, successful, meaningful life I'd built twice. And I never thought about Marcus Chen again. 10 years later, at 53 years old, I stood on another stage accepting another award, this time a Lifetime Achievement Honor from the National Organization for Women. Grandma Rose, at 95, was too frail to attend, but she'd watched from home via live stream, her nurse holding the iPad so she could see. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of women protecting their ideas, their businesses, their dreams. I talked about the foundation and the thousands of women it had helped. I talked about building something lasting, something meaningful, something that would outlive me. I did not mention Marcus Chen. Why would I? He was a ghost, a shadow, a story I barely remembered from a life I'd left behind. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, maybe 25, bright-eyed, nervous. "Ms. Chen, I just wanted to thank you. I almost married someone who was trying to steal my business idea. Your foundation's educational materials helped me see what was happening. You saved my life." I smiled at her. "You saved your own life. I just provided the map." "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. "Did someone try to steal from you? Is that why you started the foundation?" I considered the question. Considered the truth. The full, impossible truth of 2 lifetimes, 2 chances, one woman's determination to rewrite her own story. "Yes," I said simply, "Asan. Someone did, but I didn't let him, and that made all the difference." She hugged me, thanked me again, and disappeared into the crowd. I went home to the brownstone to Grandma Rose, who was waiting for me with chamomile tea and pride shining in her eyes. And I thought about the life I'd lived. 2 versions of it. One where I'd lost everything, one where I'd won everything. The difference between those 2 lives? I'd had the knowledge, the foresight, the second chance to see my enemy coming and prepare accordingly. I'd protected what was mine. I'd built what was mine. I'd become what I was always meant to be. Marcus Chen had laughed at my business idea, tried to steal it, tried to destroy me. And I'd become a billionaire, a philanthropist, a force of nature who'd helped thousands of women and changed an entire industry. He'd tried to become my landlord in every sense of the word, to own my space, my work, my life. Instead, I'd become his landlord, his judge, his executioner. Not with violence, but with success so complete and undeniable that his failure became his legacy. He'd laughed at me. And I'd had the last laugh, the longest laugh, the laugh that echoed through decades of success and meaning and beautiful, hard-won victory. I'd won. Not just against him, but for myself. And that was the sweetest victory of all.